The world's a pretty big place. With our busy lives, no reasonable person can be expected to keep up with the biggest headlines each week, so I'm here to do it for you. This is Tony Pearson coming to you on behalf of WHIP with this week's Big Picture. We have got a lot of stuff to talk about today, and for once, not all of it is the election, but we are going to start with the election. If you listened to the show last week, you probably heard a lot of talking about the recent scandals involving Donald Trump. To recap those really quick, sound bites were released of Trump talking about the perks of being a star and how it allowed him to essentially grope and harass women without facing consequences. This, of course, made him look very, very bad and kind of blew up all over the media this past week. Starting with actually last Saturday, where it got really big. If you want to hear more about it, listen to last week's episode of The Big Picture. Now that a week has passed since this all happened, we can start to talk about the actual effects this has had on Trump's campaign. So that's what we're going to do. 2 weeks ago, before this all happened, an analysis of polls in the Electoral College system placed Hillary's chance of winning the election at about 67.3% and Trump's chances at 32.7%. These numbers are coming from the 538 Project, which looks at the popular vote, Electoral College, and a bunch of other things to determine who is more and who is less likely to win the upcoming presidential election. Now that a week has passed and we have more data, we can say what this has done to the campaign. Following these scandals and the second debates last Sunday, Clinton now holds an 85.5% chance of winning the presidency, and Trump is down to a 14.5% chance. These are actually some of the more conservative estimates. Sites like the New York Times give Hillary an almost 90% chance of winning. From a popular vote standpoint, Hillary is now leading Trump by 10 to 15 points, depending on where you look. This is actually up quite a bit from where she was only a few weeks ago, leading Trump by less than 5 points. More Republicans have also been jumping ship in the wake of these scandals, most notably House Speaker Paul Ryan, who now says he is going to devote all of his efforts just to keeping the House majority. Glenn Beck, a well-known Republican talk show host, has also spoken up, describing Hillary as a moral, ethical choice for Republicans who don't want to vote Trump. Other scandals have since broken, including ones where Trump has been accused of actually raping 2 women, but at this point, and I cannot stress this enough, they are just accusations. These accusations describe events that happened around 30 years ago, and based on their timing right now, the validity of them is in question. I'll dive deeper into those issues as they do or don't get substantiated in the future. With all of that said, Trump isn't the only one who's had some scandal going on lately. While Trump scandals have definitely overshadowed the ones that Hillary has had, the news hasn't been all great for Hillary as well. For those of you not familiar with the issues surrounding Hillary's campaign, massive email leaks from the Hillary campaign as well as the DNC showed that the Democratic primaries were likely intentionally rigged against Bernie Sanders, leaving many people feeling cheated and lied to. This also came at a time when evidence suggested that Hillary was using a private email server for classified documents, which is a huge, huge no-no. People have gone to jail for these sorts of things. When emails were requested by the investigating body, they were thoroughly deleted from her servers before investigators could get their hands on them, using a program which deletes data in a way where it cannot be recovered. With all of that in mind, the latest set of leaks, as well as a recent session from the House Judiciary Committee, have shown that Clinton has been actively working with major media outlets, as well as Reddit of all things, to suppress her own controversies. This has been done by downplaying certain stories around the leaks, and in the case of forums like Reddit, actually going out and deleting posts that are critical of Hillary, while also working to spread Trump scandals. This is just an important reminder that just because one candidate is awful out in the open, that doesn't necessarily mean that the other isn't awful behind closed doors. It really is a sucky election. Moving away from election news, I've actually got some good news for once. And this good news has to do with the DEA, which I feel never happens, actually. The DEA, or Drug Enforcement Agency, seems to be showing some kind of actual intelligence for once. They are going to be reversing the decision to add kratom to the list of Schedule I drugs. Now, before I get into what kratom is, I'm going to first go over what the Schedule I listing is. Schedule I drugs are drugs that have a high potential for abuse, have no currently accepted medical treatment for use in the U.S., and lack accepted safety even under medical supervision. There are a lot of drugs on the Schedule 1 list. To name one or two, it includes heroin, LSD, and mushrooms, but the DEA has been under a lot of scrutiny for years due to the fact that marijuana is also present on that list, which, for any of you who are even a little bit familiar with what marijuana is and the science behind it, it has a moderately high potential for abuse, but it has many acceptable medical treatments in the US and around the world, and marijuana is actually one of the safest drugs out there, safer by far than alcohol and even tobacco. This brings us to kratom. Kratom is a plant which research suggests could be used to fight the opioid epidemic in the country. In short, kratom acts kind of like an opiate, reducing symptoms of withdrawal and cravings for opiates without the highs and dangers associated with actually using opiates. The drug itself is extremely difficult to actually overdose on. The only recorded deaths so far, of which there have been very few, come from interactions with other drugs. Now, this isn't to say that the drug is good for you. It still has many of the side effects associated with opiates, and if you're not taking the drug and if you don't have a reason to, you absolutely shouldn't. That said, the symptoms associated with kratom are much less severe than the ones associated with actual opiates. Because of how it relieves these symptoms, it makes the drug extremely, extremely useful for fighting pain and getting people off of opiates. This is a huge deal because right now the United States is in the middle of a huge opioid epidemic. Looking at kratom deaths, 15 people have died in some way related to kratom worldwide in the past 2 years. Now, 15 is definitely a concerning number of people, but let's look at actual opioids. About 78 people die every day from opioid-related overdose in the US alone. It's a huge problem. I personally know, or knew, multiple people who died from opioid overdose, specifically heroin, which is usually where prescription painkiller abuse leads. I also know people right now who are actively suffering from addiction to opioids. Anything that can be used to fight this awful process, I think should be used. The fact that the DEA was going to try to fight a drug which shows serious potential in being able to fight this epidemic, it was just stupid. So I guess it goes without saying that I'm very happy to see that they've reversed their decision. Before I end this segment, I do want to say one more time, kratom isn't without risks, so you shouldn't use it unless you are trying to get over a severe opioid addiction. I cannot stress that enough, but I do think it is definitely not deserving a Schedule 1 classification. And apparently, the DEA agrees. Finally, moving on into international news, I've got an update on the situation in the Philippines. For those of you not familiar with that situation, I recommend looking all the way back to episode 1 of The Big Picture, where I talk about it in detail. But the short version of the story is that the current president of the Philippines is kind of insane and is in the process of committing what I think is best described as genocide. He has outlined plans to kill 3 million drug dealers and users, in many cases without the due process of law. There are currently hit squads being used in the country to kill, and a lot of nations are really concerned about it right now. The update to this story is that after the US proceeded to criticize the ridiculous drug war going on in the Philippines right now, President Duterte has officially begun the process of kicking the US military out of the Philippines. This is a big deal because the Philippines has historically been one of our most important allies in the region, and the fact that they are dropping their ties with us in exchange for ties with China and Russia is concerning to say the least. This is something which just dropped a day or two ago. It's still kind of in the process of happening. So right now, I don't have much more to say on it besides that it's probably really bad. As the story unfolds and as I learn more information, I'll be sure to keep you all updated. Finally, moving into our last bit of news today, I've got a bit of a somber story. The world's longest reigning monarch, Thailand's king, Bhumibol Adulyadej, has passed away. At the age of 88, Adulyadej sat on the throne for 70 years. Now, the absolute monarchy was abolished in 1932, but it still remained an important figure in the eyes of the public. Think the Queen of England. Adulyadej was a very, very well-liked monarch. He traveled around the country and had many pro-poor campaigns. In many situations in the country, where the region started to destabilize, Adulyadej was the one who seemed to hold it together, at least on the public front. Because he was so well-liked, his passing is a very sad moment for Thailand. That being said, the region is expected to remain stable as the royalist army is still firmly in power. It's crazy to think about, though. Having been on the throne for 70 years, Adulide is the only king most people in Thailand have ever known. And that is all the news I've got for you today. If you've enjoyed this podcast, please tune in next week for more big picture news about all kinds of stuff happening around our country and around the world. I'm Tony Pearson from WHIP, signing out. Have a great